and we're hearing firsthand what we're doing for them and what kind of value that's having, right? We're very hands-on with really important stuff. We're not building some social media app so they can, send some pictures to their friends. This is like, in very serious ways, it's life and death stuff. So there's a ton of impact we can have with the people that we're serving.
Right.
Obviously, we can have financial successes. That's well known. I think at times that can get a little overplayed in branding, especially for me being a millennial. I'm 30. That's not as relevant of a thing for us as much. Obviously, financial success is still a key metric for a lot of goals that we'll set, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also this need to match work to our lifestyle. So, there's been a lot of thoughts on lifestyle, work balance, life work balance and all that. That's getting challenged a little bit because at times it can kind of ebb and flow. But in general, it's really important that we're matching our work to our lifestyle. And you can do that through this job because of the way it works and the nature of how it's structured and all that.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is that after 2 years, 80% of new agents are out of the industry completely. There's a really high failure rate, and that can kind of suck. And even for people who make it in this industry, like for me in California, the median insurance agent makes, $57,000 a year, and the 75th percentile makes just 65,000.
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't, door barning, those aren't, blow down the door numbers, especially given some of the struggles that people can have in this industry. So it's really important that we try to dissect and understand what it takes for someone to be successful in this industry and for someone to be happy in this industry, right? So it's those two things. It's not just the financial success, but it's also being happy and comfortable with yourself. So I always kind of love fun quotes. The Matrix is one of my favorite movies. So this
Mm-hmm.
quote's always awesome for me, which is hope. It's the quintessential human delusion. It's simultaneously the source of our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. And so for people joining this industry, they have a lot of hope. They've got, they envision what their success is
Mm-hmm.
going to look like. They're really stoked about it. But then, rubber hits the pavement. They start having to make calls. They start having to work with clients, and that can be really hard. And so it's important to maintain some realism balanced with their optimism. And so that's just a really key thing that I want to highlight as we get started in this presentation.
Okay.
So this is my dog Archer. He's looking over my shoulder.
Archer.
Yeah, that's Archer there. He's basically saying, look forward, but also make sure you're looking over your shoulder and
Okay.
keeping an eye on things. So again, don't mess this up. Don't throw away your shot. Big Hamilton fan here. You got a good opportunity here at this industry. So here's a little bit about me. So for me professionally, I started interning with a financial services company in college. I was driving, 5-10 minutes away from my college campus. I was doing my morning lifts for football. Then I was going to spend, some hours at an office. It was a new thing. I was helping process paperwork for some financial advisors, these two women, and it was a really good exposure to the industry. So once I got out of college, I worked for them full time. I eventually transitioned into being an FR for Guardian. Then I spent some time self-employed, and now I'm a benefits advisor with the LBL Group, which is an Acrisure partner agency. So with regards to NAFA was kind of an interesting thing for me,
Mm-hmm.
being like in my early 20s, learning about the industry. I've always been a big learner. And so I started just tagging along to go on all these learning lunches. There were presentations on retirement plans, disability insurance, life insurance, financial planning, all these kinds of things. I didn't really know up from down in a lot of ways. So I went to these learning lunches and got a lot out of them. From being there, when you're in this industry and you're a younger, new agent in the industry, people definitely, want to reach out to you and see what they can do to help and everything. And so doing that, I got involved at the board level pretty quickly. And so I started as the YAT leader. So that was with regards to the young advisor team, planning,
Okay.
with other partner agents or organizations, like Cal CPA and attorneys and real estate
Mm-hmm.
agents and all that. But then pretty quickly into my first term as YAT leader, the treasurer stepped down. So I was like 25. I got tapped to be the treasurer for this organization. I still was trying to learn up from down. So I was treasurer for a couple of years. I went through the role as president. I did Lilly, and now I'm a Lilly moderator for California, which I'm really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I'm from San Diego. I now live in Playa Vista, which is on the west side of LA. It's close to Venice and Santa Monica and the airport.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Occidental College, where I played 4 years of Division III football. And then I live with my girlfriend Liza and my little boy Archer. So my main things: reading, playing sports, being active. A lot of that's been driven home, especially in these last 12 months during quarantine. Our needs to
Yes.
self-care and get outside and take care of ourselves. So a little bit more expansion on my background with NAFA. So that's me and Liza, my girlfriend, a couple of years ago at the California State Conference. So I was really surprised. I was 25 and I had all these industry veterans saying, all right, you're the treasurer, manage the books. That was kind of a surprising thing to me that I was just given the reins for it. But it was also kind of inspiring to say, all right, these people are saying, hey, we think you can do it. Go learn it and figure it out. And that's a lot of what happens in this industry is that you see an outcome you want to get, and then you got to do a roadmap. You got to build a roadmap to getting there. And so with regards to being treasurer, I moved us to online QuickBooks. We didn't have that before, which was crazy. Just trying to better manage all these things and put systems into place was really fun to do at an association level. And I'm still doing that. Like I'm pushing us right now just to have a Google Drive. There's a lot of change that's going on across the economy, and we're trying to bring some of that to the industry. So again, I went from YAT to treasurer to president and now working as the Lilly moderator. Lilly, if you're not familiar with that, it means the Leadership in Life Institute. And it's this very cool, kind of behind closed doors secret program that NAFA offers. We talk about it to people and we talk about the benefits of it, but we don't really share the secret sauce until you're in Lilly. And I think it's an important component of the program's success. It's a cohort-based class where you're working with other students in the industry, other people from your local or your state chapter, and you learn a lot about yourself and the business and your place in it and where you're trying to go and how you're going to get there. So in general, the goal for NAFA is do right for our clients, do right for our business, do right for our communities, and do right for the members. And so that's a lot of what drives NAFA. One of the best NAFA experiences I've been able to have is at the advocacy level. I didn't really get it too much. When you're young and in your 20s, like you'll go vote, but you're not really aware of sometimes the impact of your votes on different things. And with regards to NAFA, I got the opportunity to go to Sacramento for state capital stuff, and then also to go to Washington, D.C. And so a few years ago when I was in D.C., here I was I think I was 27 at the time, and I got to meet with a ton of Congress people. So specifically, the one that stands out was I was sitting with Adam Schiff when he was the minority chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee or the Congress. He's in Congress. And it was so cool that I was getting to sit with this guy who I've seen on TV and I follow on Twitter and stuff. Right. And it was super cool that I was sitting there next to him and I was talking to him about, hey, we're protecting Main Street. We're taking care of American businesses. We're supporting American consumers. We want to be we want to help you and be one of your, guides when things come up affecting our industry because it affects all of the American economy. And that was really cool that this guy was sitting there and looking directly at me and we're getting to have a nice conversation about this stuff. Since then, I've gotten to interact with other representatives, whether it's at the state or federal level. And it's been a really fun, rewarding experience that most people don't get to have. I've got a few friends who've gotten to walk the halls of Congress for professional reasons, but it's a pretty unique thing to be able to have that kind of exposure. And it kind of drives home just how important our work is, right? It gets beyond just our paycheck. It really drives home that what we're doing affects communities, businesses, employees, American people. So the two main things I want to talk about today is we're trying to think about how to have a good life and make things happen. You've got to know yourself and you have to have a business plan. I put business in parentheses because in general, you really need to have a plan overall. Your business plan is a key component of that though, and they're very interrelated. So again, who am I? You got to think about this. You got to really think about this and you have to understand it. And it's not a destination, it's a journey. With regards to knowing yourself, I always love this quote from Socrates, and I've heard it both ways. I kind of like it the first way, but I put it up both ways. The unaware or the unexamined life, it's not worth living. And what does he mean by that? You could take entire college classes. You could do entire theses about that one quote. Really, it's about saying, I need to understand what is driving me, what affects me, how I fit into this world so that I can then, fall through and fulfill the goals and dreams that I have, whatever that might be, right? We have to have that awareness because otherwise we're just reacting to everything. We're asleep. We're a little robot just responding to things.
Right.
We have to be able to step outside of ourselves, examine what we're doing, be aware of what we're doing in order to live a happy and fulfilling life. So the really good news is that within this industry, it forces us to be aware, it forces us to be mindful, and it forces us to understand the separation between control and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it is trying to get a hold of clients for those initial meetings and getting blown off and blown off and blown off, having a case go sideways for some reason that was outside of your control, you have to manage the emotional roller coaster that this industry can take you on, because otherwise you're just along for the ride. And if you're in this industry, it's because you think that you can exert some control over the direction of your life and the direction of your business and all. You have to think about it that way as well for your own emotional state, because what we do emotionally impacts how we're going to perform professionally. At, a low point in my career, one of my mentors said to me just that. She said, the industry, it's going to bring out all of the worst parts of you. And that's so true, because there's just so many moving pieces in building a practice and maintaining a practice and working with clients, that if any one of those is deficient, if there's a bottleneck in any one of those areas, it's going to stop the entire production, right? So you just kind of think, if you're, at a restaurant and they're making a meal, if they did not wash the plates well, it doesn't matter if it's a 5-star meal otherwise, like food's going to be off. If they didn't, do the sauce right, whatever it is, like everything has to be working at an acceptable level, at a good level for things to work really well. And so that's the bad news about this industry. If you're deficient in one of those areas, it's going to bite you in the ass at some point. So it might be earlier in your career when you're struggling to make ends meet. It could be later in your career though, because I've seen existing, veteran agents who they, are held up on a pedestal. They win all the awards. They've been cut in some corners. That comes back to bite them. And, if that's lawsuits from clients or what have you, that's not a fun thing. I've seen agents get served paperwork, court summons in the office. And that's a very uncomfortable thing. And you realize, maybe cutting the corners really isn't worth it,
True.
And the other thing is that starting that career, it's going to suck as long as you let it. And there's kind of like two ways of interpreting that. Again, it's this, like I kind of have gotten into philosophy in the last couple of years. So I think some of these generic statements are kind of fun because you can parse them out in different ways. This industry can suck as long as you let it in two ways. It can suck as long as you let it just by your ability to control your business. So if you're out there talking to people, pounding the pavement, making things happen, you're eventually going to get that financial success that you're thinking of. But the letting it aspect is another one where you have to reframe a lot of the stuff going on in this industry. Because if you are constantly chasing this future state, the reality is that we're all on this hedonic treadmill where what we have, even if it's what we had dreamed of, it's not enough in the current moment. You're always going to be thinking of something else. So you have to start generating some appreciation, some gratitude for the current state you're at, even if you're thinking of something that you want for the future, right? So you have to have that, because otherwise you're always going to feel like something is missing. You have to be comfortable with where you're at right now, but also pushing yourself to strive for more. So second part of this, I love this chart. This is from James Clear. He's one of my favorite authors. It's called The Plateau of Latent Potential. I don't think he came up with it. I've seen it in other spots, but he does highlight it in his book, Atomic Habits, that I've got at the end of this in a further reading section that we'll go over. Basically, we always think that progress is linear, that we're going to start doing something, if it's playing the piano, learning a language, or building a business, and we're just going to, like clockwork, make incremental progress over time. That's not really how stuff works. It really sucks for a while at the start, and it sucks for longer than you think, but then the gains start growing exponentially. They start growing geometrically because they're compounding on themselves. And so if we can realize and accept that fact of how these things work, you can have a much easier and much less stressful start to your career. So you have to be in mind of a couple things. First, disappointments are simply unmet expectations. So if you're frustrated with where you're at in your career, you can control things. You can start calling more people and whatnot, but you can also reset your expectations. So you can kind of say, I know that I'm just going to eat dirt for a couple of years before I make this thing happen. And then it's going to be gravy. Like if you can think of it that way, that can be really helpful, because, people who come in who think that they're just going to suddenly, be able to afford that $600 a month, lease for the sports car and all that stuff within a couple months because they just sold some policies. What happens if they don't do it? You kind of think through this outcome matrix. If that doesn't happen, you're going to be so disappointed. You got to have some resiliency. You got to think about that. And so in the Lilly program, one of the books that we study is Jim Collins, another one of my favorite authors. One of the things he talks about is the Stockdale paradox. So the short story there is that James Stockdale, he was shot down during the Vietnam War, and he was a prisoner of war camp. And he survived something like 4 or 5 years, I want to say, before he eventually got home. He had this really interesting comment, this entire reflection over his time there, where he mentions how there's these prisoners, the prisoners who didn't make it were the ones who thought that they were going to get out by Christmas. What does he mean by that exactly? Well, it's this idea of disappointments and expectations. And there's such a mind-body connection, right? And so these prisoners who thought they were going to get out by Christmas, they would say, we're getting out by Christmas. We're getting out by Christmas. Christmas rolls around and they're not out. Okay, well, now we're disappointed. Okay, well, now we're definitely going to be out by, Easter. Okay, well, you're not out by Easter. Well, we'll be out by, and they just kept rolling that forward and kept getting more and more disappointed. And so a thing he talks about is that you have to be able to balance two somewhat conflicting things. You have to maintain this unwavering faith in the eventual success or outcome that you're seeking. And you have to marry that with the ability to confront the brutal facts of your current situation. So you have to have this short-term, almost not pessimism, but realism with long-term optimism, so that you're not getting frustrated and you can just keep doing the same thing that you're trying to do. It's, not in a bad way, but you really do just have to hit your head against a wall repeatedly to make things happen in this industry. And we've all been there, and we can all talk about that. One of the things then, as you're thinking about this, is that the obstacle is the way. It's a line from Ryan Holiday, third author that I got referenced. And that is a great line that I've always loved, because it, again, you can interpret it in a couple different ways. The first is that the obstacle is the way. You need to not go around obstacles. You need to figure out and understand obstacles that you're facing. And there's a couple of really good business reasons for that. So if you think about it, you're not a special snowflake. You're like anyone else in this industry. You're like anyone else in the world. If you are encountering some obstacle, it's more likely than not that other people have encountered that obstacle before you as well. And because it's difficult, most people have avoided it and just gone around it. So it's kind of this obstacle that exists because no one's been able to solve it or unlock it, or it's very difficult to. So if you think about that, in a competitive situation like this market, where you're trying to win business, sometimes you're in competitive situations with other agents or companies. You have to think about, well, if I can unlock this obstacle, if I can fix this and other people haven't, that's a competitive advantage for me. So you have to really analyze obstacles that you face and figure out if this is a bottleneck for other people in this industry, and I can figure out how to get through it. If I can unlock it, figure out the secret sauce, whatever that is, that can do a lot for my business. So you have to always be thinking, okay, if I'm struggling with something, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? For us on the benefit side, if some client's really struggling with paperwork, it's like not figuring out workarounds. It's saying, let's attack that then. Let's get you online. Let's do some integrations. Let's use technology to make your life easier. Let's not run away from this and just figure out somewhat easier ways of filling out paperwork. Let's just throw the paperwork out and get rid of it. And so it's really important in this process that you are, keeping in mind where you're trying to get to and analyzing that process of getting there, so you can make it as short as possible so that you can get through this period. You got to be able to understand and deal with the crappy stuff early on, but we all want to move this intersection here, and we definitely want to bring this up. So you got to be a realist, but you got to be an optimist. So that comes down to business plan. You have to have a business plan in this industry. It's absolutely critical. So the basics of a business plan are you've got a mission, vision, objectives, strategies, and actions. You could really honestly expand this to anything in life. It doesn't even just hold to your business, but we're talking about this with context for our businesses. So really quickly, definitions there. Mission is why do you exist? Your vision is where are you trying to get to, or what kind of final outcome are you looking for? Objectives are how are you objectively measuring the attainment of that vision? Strategies are how you're going to get those objectives met. And then action plan is really that gritty day-to-day, minute-to-minute work of making those strategies happen. So the three kind of key things that I think are important to a business plan, beyond just those concepts of the mission, vision, objectives, strategies, and action plan, it's leverage, it's your brand and equity, and it's a flywheel. So these are all kind of just, I'm stealing these from other people like Naval Ravikant and more Jim Collins stuff. The first one that we'll talk about is leverage. So leverage is a really interesting thing. It's one of the big drivers of the attractiveness of our industry. Leverage is when you can get more of an outcome from the same input than you did before because you just pay a little bit more attention to how things work. And so in our industry, one of the key things there that people love about it is that we're not trading time for money. We have the ability to spend time doing certain high leverage activities that are going to generate the outcomes, the results, the income, the revenue that we're looking for. And so, that's a really important thing for some people to think about because I remember earlier in my career, I was sitting there busting my butt over some paperwork for some clients. Guy next to me is doing the same thing, but he's got another zero or two added to the, his check that he's getting every month because he was just working on something a little bit different than me. We're both filling out the same paperwork. We're using the same ink. Nothing is different about exactly what we're doing physically. Is what's different is how he was applying himself. And so we have to think about how we can exert leverage in our industry. One of the biggest things there is you got to be digital. Digital helps us lever ourselves. If that is being, in more places than one, if it is the ability to be working when we're not working. And what I mean by that is you got to ask two questions. You got to ask, how can I make more money? How can I do more production? How can I make more revenue and get more results in the same amount of time? That's going to be a leverage question. And you're going to have to look at your business and how it works and what are your, inputs of time and effort.
Mm-hmm.
How can you make those as highly valued as possible? So you could do, you kind of think through, okay, what is a $10 an hour task, an $100 an hour task, $1,000 an hour task, or a $10,000 an hour task, right? There's some things that you do that are driving 90% of your outcome. You're also doing things that you could probably hire someone out for. So you have to really think about, okay, if I'm trying to hit some goal, there are certain things I'm doing that are driving the vast majority of my success. How can I emphasize those as much as possible so that in the time that I'm spending on this industry, I'm getting the greatest return for it?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you need to think about too, the second question I have there about leverage is you have to ask yourself, how can I be selling? Because that's the majority of people in this industry are selling in some way.
Right.
How can I be in front of people talking about what I do, building up awareness of me and getting myself closer to additional clients? How can I be doing that if I'm not doing that? What I mean by that is, how can I be in more places than one? How can I use technology? How can I use content to be in front of people so that it's not always about, am I sitting across the table from someone or like this, sitting across the phone or camera from someone,
Right.
trying to sell? And so that's a really key thing. It's, that's why people who have, marketing agents, it's why people who have podcasts, have YouTube channels or on TV, they have this leverage because they're not always saying, hey, I'm just trying to, do this thing per hour and make, $50 an hour or $100 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
That they're in more places than one. So they're able to leverage themselves out. So then a second component of that, and it leads into this, is a concept of brand or equity. So that is one thing that our industry typically doesn't exist too much of for most agents, is this idea of equity. You usually have to be an agency owner or self-employed to have equity, but we still think of that for ourselves. So we are all a brand. We all in some way have a few words that come to mind when people think of us. And even if you have not exercised control over that and you've not thought about that, that's still the case. So if you have friends, and it's really not even those first connection friends, it's really those extended acquaintances, people have different things they think of when they think of you, whether or not you have curated that or managed that or developed that intentionally. And so it's really important that you think about, what is my brand? What is how am I building up the equity of myself? Because this is a relationship driven business. You need people to think of you for you to be able to get clients, right? You need referrals. Referrals are a key part of this business. You have to be managing how people think of you. So you have to ask yourself, am I going to be a generalist? Am I going to be a specialist? There's a lot of your business plan that goes into thinking about this. Is it that I need to become more educated in a specific niche topic? Is it more that I'm going to be a generalist, but I have a path forward through which it's going to make sense for me to be a generalist, right? Right now with our highly virtual and moving more and more virtual and digital industry, you got to really think about how this fits into the bigger picture of how you're going to be, again, leveraging yourself as that generalist or specialist and what your brand is going to be. So one concept here from Jim Collins that's really helpful, he talks about firing bullets and calibrating with them before you fire cannonballs. So try things on. If you suddenly decide that you're going to become this disability insurance specialist, don't, sell the house and sell the farm and go all in on it. Start doing some small tests, and do some A/B testing, figure things out there and see if it's going to be viable. Once you've fired enough bullets and you've calibrated yourself to figure out if something is going to make sense, then it's time to, fire the cannonball, go all
Mhm.
in, commit to it. Right. So I can, talk about myself for that. I've got a background in mental health. I lost my father actually to suicide when I was younger, and it's gotten
Mhm.
me involved with suicide prevention and mental health areas since then. And so in my 20s, I was on the board for a local chapter of a mental health and suicide prevention organization. I got comfortable talking about these things and understanding what's going on, what's working, what's not working in that space. And
Mhm.
now, in my position as an employee benefits advisor, I bring that to the table, not talking to my groups. With my generation, people who are increasingly in charge of companies and making benefits decisions, they're aware their healthcare system kind of sucks when it comes to mental health.
Sure.
But on the plus side, there are a lot of initiatives and a lot of movements towards improving that. And in general, there's this value of it, right? And so I'm using that to then open the door with conversations and open the door with companies on, all right, you've got your benefits and all this. How well are they handling mental health at your company? What's going on there? And that's a question a lot of people are either wrestling with or they
Mhm.
haven't really well been able to answer. And so I had a conversation yesterday with a college, I can't even call him a friend, an acquaintance who I haven't talked to in, since I probably was sitting next to him in an econ class. And he reached out to me because he equated the word mental health with me. That's pretty cool. Conversation came up because he's working on a day of action with MTV and some other large organizations, and he wants me to
Mhm.
be a part of that. That's a pretty
Amazing.
cool opportunity. And so that's what I mean when I say think about your brand, think about your equity. If you're someone who's already on social media a lot, you already kind of get that. But
Mhm.
it is sometimes a new concept for us because everyone, again, already has something in mind for us. It's kind of that old adage, if you don't have a plan, you have a plan. Your plan is to not have a plan. You
Okay.
have a brand, whether or not you've thought about your brand. You really have to think about it. Then the final concept, and again, brand equity now and leverage both flow into this, is the concept of a flywheel. Full disclosure, I still don't totally understand mechanically what a flywheel is. It's in the Jim Collins book, and I love the idea. The idea really is that there's some process that you have. It kind of ties into this plateau of latent potential. It takes a lot of effort to get something moving. There's a lot of of momentum you're trying to build up, but as you push and push and push on something,
Mhm.
it starts speeding up more and more. And so you kind of think of this like, if you have an idea of like marginal cost and outcomes and stuff, you're not getting a lot for it for those first few pushes, but over
Right.
time, every time you push it, it's accelerating more and more.
Mhm.
So that's a really helpful thing for us to think about our businesses because it's a perfect analogy for what happens in our practices. They always say your first few years in the industry, you're going to work so hard and you're going to make nothing. And then later on, you're probably not really going to work nearly as hard as you did in those first few years, but you're going to make much more. The
Okay.
reality there is, again, it's this idea you've built your brand, you've figured out how to deploy leverage. You have to be thinking about how all of your actions are pushing this flywheel of your career, of your practice forward. And so you really need to be thinking about how are all of these things working together. And so that's why people talk about what are your personal and social interests? Is there a way that you can incorporate those within your practice as well so that the things that you're doing professionally feed into some social goal you have and the work you're doing
Mhm.
on that social goal can feed into your practice? So for
Okay.
me, that's pretty fun that I've done this stuff on mental health and that feeds into my professional practice. And then now that's feeding back into this social mission I have for mental health, right? It's this kind of this synergy that we have, this 1+1=3 concept.
Mhm.
Finding these positive feedback loops in your practice is going to be really important long term. You're not probably going to see this on a year-to-year business plan. So it's important that
Right.
when you do visions in a business plan, you've got that 12-month, maybe that quarterly vision of where you're going to be. You got to kind of ask yourself 5 and 10 years from now, where am I? Where am I going to be? And then thinking about working backwards from that, beginning with the end in mind, what are the positive feedback loops I can create within my life to get me there? And that's
Mhm.
all part of this business plan that we have to have in order to be successful in this industry and not just successful financially, but really successful personally. I
Right.
have thought about that. Like I could make twice as much money as I'm making now, but if I'm doing stuff I hate and I'm working with clients I hate and I'm not getting fulfillment out of it,
Mhm.
I might not be really happy with that. You know what I mean? I personally came from a medical background. My dad was a doctor, my mom was a nurse, and you know, I usually wasn't picked up by my parents at school. You know, that was usually a like special occasion that one of our parents was actually picking us up from school.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, emergencies would always come up that would pull family members out of family occasions. And so
Right.
this idea of being able to control my time, control where I'm at, exercising the ability to be in control of my life has been really valuable for this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Having a business plan and thinking about these concepts and how they work together to give us that life that we want is really critical and key. So, business plan, having an awareness, it's where we've got to get to. So, the last thing I'll leave you with, you have to be a learner to be successful in this industry. And I think you have to be a learner in general to get a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment out of life because there's so much going on right now. Life is so much more complicated than it used to be. You know, 100 years ago, you were deciding if you were going to, you know, shoe horses or you were going to like build furniture. There's so
True.
much going on now, competing for our attention, competing for our resources, if that's financial or time or energy. We have to be able to step outside of ourselves and have some awareness of where we're at, where we're trying to get to, and how we can manage that process as effectively as possible so we can be happy and content with our progress and then eventually whenever we get there. But the key thing that you'll eventually learn is that there is no final destination. You have to figure out how to enjoy the journey, and that's a conversation for another topic. That's a topic for another day.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, some reading that I could really strongly recommend. Some of this are things you'll read through the Lilly program. Other things are outside of that. So again, Jim Collins, Naval Ravikant, a lot of people. You just got to understand what's going on in the world and how the world is making decisions around you, so you can manage yourself. Because this industry, again, as we talked about at the top of the presentation, you can do some really amazing things with this industry. You know, people develop a lot of financial success, but they also can balance that with that time flexibility and success.
Mm-hmm.
I've got friends in medicine, I've got friends in law. They're really stoked on, you know, going down the partner path in law or what have you, but
Right.
they're trading their time for money. We're not doing that in our industry. We have to be in the job in the business for sure, but we have that flexibility. I can clock out at 2 o'clock on a Friday and go out and do something,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that my business is taken care of if I'm doing the right things at the right time with the right reasons. That's a key thing with this business that is like so awesome about it. You're helping real people with real problems. You're generating financial success for yourself. You're potentially fulfilling social outcomes that you're in seek of personally. And with all of that, you have the flexibility to have some lifestyle design, which is such a neat thing in today's day and age.
Mm-hmm.
So that's everything I've got for you guys. My main thing is just go make great things happen, understand yourself, and you're going to be able to do that. So time to open it up for some questions, some Q&A. So that's everything I've got. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much. I guess my focus right now, coming up a year, with the pandemic, embarking on this career path as I shared, I work full time at a university. I'm a program coordinator for career services.
Mhm.
But what brought me to this path was I'm also a lead steward for our union, our labor union, and just speaking to our different members on some of the struggles that they're facing economically. A lot of our members, depending upon their positions, are minorities. So, growing up, they didn't have the best or access to resources in terms of savings, planning, taking care of the inevitable,
Mhm.
making sure that they have, emergency savings. I think the standard is 6 months. When I say that to certain people, they look at me like, oh my gosh, I can barely, put gas on my car, or, have money for next week, or, that kind of thing. So what I'm just trying to do right now is just kind of think of like creative ways to reach and impact people who don't have access to resources, to let them know um, that, back to your other point, it's not just me selling, but I'm trying to
Mhm.
provide a service and a resource and an even plateau for those who may not be aware of savings plans or life insurance and what the true benefit is. Because in some communities, even though you're paying into something and you haven't used it yet, or
Mhm.
thank goodness may have not had the occasion, in some communities, they see that as a waste of money and not a good source of money where they could have put that money somewhere else or used it for something else. So that's what I'm trying to figure out as I go into the world, either virtually or within, social distancing, to kind of just like explain to different communities, that hopefully that I will serve, how valuable and how important it is to have these additional coverages or just have the knowledge, to empower them so they can make the best decisions.
Totally. Yeah. So that's all really good points. I think the thing that comes to mind first that you mentioned at the top there is that I think the statistic is that 50% of Americans would struggle to meet a sudden $400 emergency
Yes.
cost, I think is the number.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's relevant. I put clients with, employee benefits plans. Sometimes medical insurance can have $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 annual deductibles. That's a real thing where we're trying to figure out how can we bridge the gap on where people are at financially with what kind of tools and things we're putting into place. And
Mm-hmm.
we have people who are doctors who don't understand their health insurance. Like these
True.
financial topics, we make them palatable for the industry. We don't always do a good job making them understandable and simple for consumers, right? Even though
Mm-hmm.
consumers are the ones at the end of the day, obviously consuming it. And so with regards to some of those things, there are major inequities and disparities that come up because of lacks of education, lacks of resources. Like we talk about
Mm-hmm.
that in healthcare a lot, there's a bazillion examples we could get into on the healthcare side. For financial reasons, that is a tricky thing. Like I grew up and my dad would get home from work and he'd, print out his stock statements. And so I'd look over his shoulder at those. So I had some concept of that. Like I'd heard of a 401k, I'd heard of some of these
Right.
things. And I think we sometimes take those for granted for people. Like I've had friends ask me incredibly simple questions about 401ks. And I kind of then, again, we talked about awareness a little bit. You kind of step back and you think, okay, this is a question they probably could have Googled. So by asking me, there's a reason for
By
that.
them
They
coming to you
either,
directly. Yes.
yeah, they kind of want some human to human contact there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that comes up, there are definitely resources. Like I would honestly say for you guys through the union, you probably have a 401k provider. There's probably financial support, financial counseling support that they can
Mm-hmm.
offer, not pro bono, but not at a marginal cost for the employees. Because
Right.
we do that. My retirement plan person in our office, that's what she does. She works with some universities and she just plans office hours once a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And those office hours, the hard thing is obviously someone has to pull the trigger to schedule and to make it to that office hour. So then
Yes.
you start thinking, okay, so what are other modes of delivery here? And so you could say, all right, first is scheduling quarterly office hours with
Mm-hmm.
licensed professionals who are not selling, they're just talking to people.
Right.
Because like she was talking to people about their mortgages and stuff because there was a fire that destroyed some homes near a university. And so she was, not doing something that's, from the industry side, it's not revenue generating for us, but that's fine because it's life enhancing for the people that she's working
Mm-hmm.
with. And so the education is the really big one, because then is what one dynamic that can come up financially for people that is so insidious. And we're seeing this right now with some of these bull markets in different areas is something called the survivorship bias,
Mm-hmm.
which is, people, there can be dynamics in certain areas where people will talk about outcomes if they go a certain way, but they don't talk about them if they don't go that way. Right. So
Correct. Correct.
classic example is like people who made money doing something are going to talk about how much money they made doing something.
Yes. And how
People who
smooth it
didn't make
was.
money doing something are not going to talk about how much money they lost.
Right.
And so you see this because like, with some of the term that we're hearing now is meme stocks, and I played around with it. Like it's fun, but people are going to talk about how much money they made trading meme stocks, like, GameStop and stuff. They're not going to talk about, oh, I lost my shirt doing something, I've had
Or my
an uncle who
retirement.
he's had
Yes.
major trades go sideways. He's not vocal about it. He's depressed
Mm-hmm.
as hell about it, but he's not boasting about it,
Correct.
And so that is a factor that needs to get, there's this, just as much as we want to educate people on financial topics, you also kind of need to incorporate some psychology there so they understand like that one person that who's got the car, they probably aren't contributing to their retirement plan and they're probably racking up credit card bills because it's the stuff you don't see.
Yes. You
It's
got
a
to give both
classic iceberg
sides.
problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could go afford a lease on a new car right now, but it would then be money that I'm not spending elsewhere. So this idea of opportunity costs definitely comes into play there. I would say the best thing would be to figure out how can you meet people where they're at. So right now, virtual, is it doing monthly educational series and
Mm-hmm.
bringing in speakers? Like I could refer someone to you who's a NAFA member. He's a previous Lilly grad from California out here.
Okay.
That's what he does because what is his podcast called? His name's Emlyn Miles Mattingly. His podcast is called Minority Money, I want to say. And he talks a lot about this, how there's a, just as much as wealth can accumulate from generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
um, at a higher level, the reason that we are not just a bunch of deer running around in the woods is that we do accumulate knowledge as a society. But when you get more granular than that, there are some disparities in how that knowledge accumulates from generation to generation,
Mm-hmm.
for other reasons that we don't need to get into. But that is something that comes up. It's just like we talked about, like, my mom at, when I was 23 and started working, she was like, "Are you opening a Roth IRA account?" Well, why did she know to ask about that? Well, it's, like there's
Yes.
just that kind of stuff. And so that then can lead to, not unfair outcomes, but it's a disparity that we do want to address, because if we have better education, more people are going to be more financially secure.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those measures can be improved. So I would say, like, monthly educational series, bringing in speakers
Okay.
on different topics would be great. And then working as well with whoever is administering your like retirement plans could probably come in and do quarterly sessions for financial education.
Mm-hmm.
Because like lending is another one. If you have anyone who's taking advantage of payday loans, they're being taken
Woo.
advantage of by payday loans.
Yes. Well, I
I
think
mean,
also too now I think it's official. Are they illegal in New Jersey? I know in some states there was huge legislation about it. But it's, yeah, I think in New Jersey, I think officially now they're illegal. But I know that in some communities, for them, that is the way to go because there are no other resources. And it's just, like when we counsel, our members, in our union, and we sit and we go over, our budgets and things with them to help
mhm.
them, with their savings or pay bills or put food on the table.
Yeah,
We're thinking, also trying to help them with, you know, establishing a bank account because again, in some communities, the banks are not good. They'll take my money and they don't understand the basics of saving.
yeah,
Um, some still don't, I know quite a few that still don't have direct deposit. To them,
yeah,
they have to go physically put that check in that teller's hand, have them cash it out, and then physically put it in the deposit. Yes. So again, it's the education because there's so many different things and different resources that I just want to, make them aware of because it will save them time, it'll see their energy, and they'll be able to see your savings are now growing. You're not going
yeah.
to the ABC place and going to a check cashing place and also paying those fees. But it's a slow process, but those are some really good points. I appreciate it.
Yeah. It's like one of those things, because we talk about this in healthcare, but it's applicable to financial planning too. Transparency is really important. And so we've seen some recent legislation come through for transparency
Mm-hmm.
on healthcare costs. Um, Transparency is also really important for financial areas, right? So you just, like you mentioned,
Correct.
overdraft fees, bank fees, all that stuff. Like, anything that's free is not free. It's just
It's not
then
right.
there's some drawing of revenue from you that's a lot
Mm-hmm.
not transparent. But you have to marry that transparency with an ability to understand what you're looking at, right? Like, I could get a bunch of transparent healthcare data, but if it's on stuff that I'm not familiar with, I can't do anything with it, right? There's got
Correct.
to be this balance of understanding, getting that information, but then also knowing how to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another one, is those fees. Like if you just tell people your bank's charging you fees, well, they also need to understand, well, what is the process for opening up an account with my local,
Mm-hmm.
credit union? And
Right.
maybe that local credit union has like, $0 fee checking accounts, and all
Mm-hmm.
that. They need to be able to understand how to then open that and go through that process. Because the analogy that I've always heard that is so appropriate for these things is that when you're trying to get someone to change a behavior, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and Atomic Habits is a great book about that. When you're trying to get someone to change a behavior, you have to think that they are on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Okay.
Whether it's rocking up and down, whether there's gale, windstorms and all this stuff going on, it's the boat they're on. And the prospect is usually stay on the boat or jump off into the water. So when you go up with a boat and you try to get them to jump onto your boat, if it's, buying a new financial product, if it's making a change in their life, if whatever, they're still going to have to jump in the water and swim over to your boat in some way. And so you have to do two things. You have to help them understand the boat that they're on is actually on fire right now. Like it's really bad. Like you need them to not just want to come to you, but you need them to want to leave where they're at. And then you also need to make it as easy as possible for them to get there. And you need to make it as clear to them as possible what that process is going to be like. Because we have that. I go to clients and, or to prospective groups, and they're like, hey, I think it seems like we can really help with your benefits administration and compliance and reduce your spending and blah, 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 blah. But then they don't really understand how that works. They don't understand what it takes to transition and to transfer, advisory services to us. And so we have to walk them through what the frictions are there to reduce those frictions. Because otherwise, if it's just in their head, you have no control over what people are thinking until you start addressing it. You got to give them information. Cool. So I'd say that's like the biggest thing is like, you have to level set both what's currently going on for people and what questions they should ask, but then also what answers they should expect from those questions. So that if they get a question that's different, they can compare it and say, oh my God, like, I didn't know I could do this. Or like, I mean, some people, like, they don't even know, I mean, credit building is its own story, but it'd probably be really powerful for people to understand what credit is and how it impacts things. And that if you don't have credit lines open, you're not building up credit. And then that can impact your ability to do certain financial transactions in the future.
Car insurance.
Yeah.
Because here in New Jersey, they're trying to work on some legislation in terms of, what is me, paying my bill or not paying my bill impact the way that I drive.
Yeah.
Or like, my education level. Yes.
Yeah. Like I'm really interested. So our company, Acrisure just entered a partnership with the basketball player, Russell Westbrook, and then the football player, Russell Wilson. So I'm hoping we get people other than Russell's into it at some point. But the idea there is they're trying to work with minority businesses. So certified MBEs on helping increase the understanding, knowledge, and usage of insurance and financial products within minority owned businesses, because that is a part of the market that, like, people don't sometimes know about the ability to use insurance to do different things. So if you have inventory, you should have some inventory insurance. There's a lot of things like that, there's that, we have people that call us up and they're like, we need a, low deductible, blah, blah, blah. Like they know the language of health insurance, but sometimes people don't know the language of health insurance, and that impacts their ability to make, the right decisions for themselves. And then that model just extrapolates to everything else that your finances can touch.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let me know if you have any questions on that. And totally, yeah. Like I said, I think the quarterly office hours for your team could be really helpful. And then as well, bringing in speakers and getting people used to like engaging with them.
Right.
You'd probably like offer prizes and stuff, say like, oh, we're going to randomly draw people who attend, this month's presentation on, what to know about lending rates and all that.
I like it.
Stuff could be really valuable.
Yes. Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thanks, John, for joining us today. Appreciate it. And thank you, Leanne,
so
for leading the conversation and being a part of this month's Advisor Ambassador. So for the rest of your week, hope you guys have a great one, and rest of your day as well.
Thank you as well. Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.